Wir konnten nichts anbieten, was am Ende keinen Bestand haben würde.
At the 2004 UN General Assembly, Jack Straw set up a meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister, Kamal Kharrazi, to see if there was any way forward. But Straw was late for the meeting. There was a crisis. A British civilian, Ken Bigley, had been taken hostage in Iraq.
Jack is he's having to phone the family of the hostage we have in Iraq. It's obviously extremely difficult for us. It's a huge.
Yeah, the same problem.
2 years earlier, the West had spurned Iran's offer of help to deal with Iraq. Now, Kharrazi couldn't resist pointing out how much that refusal was costing.
It's obviously
very dangerous environment.
It is a dangerous environment.
Sure.
Yeah. More dangerous.
It was more safe when Saddam Hussein was involved.
For whom was it more safe? Minister, was it more safe for the hundreds of thousands of people?
No, even for British citizens.
Iraqis weren't safe under Saddam Hussein. Yes. Iranians weren't safe under Saddam Hussein. How many Iranians were killed by Saddam Hussein?
Yeah. And they were killed by arms supplied by European countries, Americans, and chemical weapons supplied to...
You were not supplied by us.
Let's see.
Anyway.
So how are you?
I'm okay. Difficult times.
How are you?
Fine.
A few minutes later, Straw showed up and broke the tension. But the two sides were no closer to breaking the impasse over Iran's nuclear enrichment. The Iranians wanted trade embargoes lifted. Europe couldn't deliver. Long-standing American sanctions punished anyone who traded with Iran.
حتی هواپیمای مسافربری رو که ما در این زمینه مشکل داریم و جان شهروندانمون در خطره، با فشارهای غیر منطقی آمریکا به سادگی دسترسی به امکاناتی که بتونیم نوسازی بکنیم ناوگان هواییمون نداریم.
Jack Straw decided to ask Colin Powell to let Europe offer some incentives, some carrots, to Iran. He raised it at the annual dinner of G8 foreign ministers.
I had a very close relationship with Colin Powell. I talked to him and said, we've got to give something to them and let us see. It's in our interest to try and give something to the Khatami regime.
On a senti qu'il acceptait, en fait, le principe des carottes et que peut-être on pourrait espérer, du côté américain, un geste. On savait, on avait dit aux Américains, vous savez, un geste, c'est sans doute les avions. Et donc seuls les Américains pouvaient faire ça.
And Colin Powell agreed and said, well, he thought it would be very useful for the political directors to meet, and he invited us all to Washington a couple of weeks later to do that.
Nous sommes sortis de ce dîner dans un grand état de satisfaction.
The Europeans now worked out the detail of exactly what could be offered to Iran. 3 weeks later, they brought their proposal to Washington.
Nous pensions que peut-être qu'une décision très importante allait être prise du côté américain. Nous savions que ça allait être difficile. Nous entendions les bruits les plus divers.
The administration's most outspoken hardliner had been lobbying against the new policy.
I was stunned that Powell had deviated from our policy by saying, let's offer the Iranians even more carrots than the EU3 had been offering.
But the Europeans were met by Powell's loyal deputy, Richard Armitage.
We missed what you said outside there.
The reason I even met with them was because they had to realize that there were some sensible people on the 7th floor.
Et puis Armitage est parti. Et la délégation américaine a été présidée, à partir de ce moment-là, par John Bolton.
You could see the evident dissatisfaction on John Sawyer's face because I was still there.
And I leant over and said, let me know if I can help in terms of achieving a common outcome to this. And I just got a sort of frosty glare.
In the face of Bolton's hostility, Sawers presented the new plan on behalf of the Europeans.
Our proposal included spare parts for their aircraft, possible sale of new aircraft, the capacity for international nuclear companies to cooperate with the Iranians on civil nuclear power.
Bolton nous a écoutés avec un visage qui ne bougeait pas.
Bolton said, right, has everybody else spoken? Okay. And he got out a sheet of paper and said, this is the US position.
We expected Iran to suspend all of its uranium enrichment activities and come into full compliance with its safeguards obligations. And not until that happened would we consider anything.
Le voilà en train de lire comme un fonctionnaire soviétique un texte, un papier, qui était un papier de fermeture totale.
Why had we travelled across the Atlantic and wasted 2 days of our time to go to Washington just to go to a meeting which was undermined by the hosts and the people who were organising it?
Well, a lot of parts of U.S. policymaking doesn't make sense from the outside, but John Bolton was placed in the department by the Vice President of the United States, who had great faith in his ability. Unfortunately, when he's not on your side, and it's very difficult to fire him, you couldn't have a worse enemy.
Soon afterwards, Secretary of State Colin Powell and his deputy Richard Armitage announced their resignations. The next talks between the EU3 and Iran were scheduled in Paris. Neither side had much to offer, but neither was willing to accept failure. So the Iranians agreed to a complete suspension for 3 months, while the Europeans would try to find ways to increase trade.
We put it in the Paris Agreement that suspension is essential as long as negotiations proceed. And we use the word proceed to show that it's not simply the negotiations should go on, but in fact they should move forward.
The deal was signed.
I was on a busy commuter train to Oxfordshire on the Friday, looking forward to a bit of a rest because it had been a very busy period. And I get this call on the train, and it's Karazi who wants to talk to me.
The Iranian foreign minister wanted to discuss the agreement just reached in Paris.
There's no way I could take the call, as it were, with the audience of some scores of commuters. So I say, hang on, and I go to the lavatory and then find out what he wants. And what he wanted was essentially to amend this deal.
The Iranians had just signed the agreement to turn off and seal every single centrifuge they owned. Now their foreign minister asked for an exemption, for research.
He said, well, we did say none, but actually we mean 20. I said I have to call him back because by this stage, trying to negotiate on something as important as this from a train lavatory and with the computers, I think somebody was actually at the door wanting to make use of the loo for its proper purpose.
Jack phoned me to tell me what Karazi had said to him. And I said I thought that sounded extremely dangerous. I got together a couple of elderly gents who'd been involved back in the time when we were developing enrichment back in the 1950s and 60s. They said, oh, I remember how we did this. We had 16 centrifuges that we ran continuously for 2 years. And after 2 years of running 16 centrifuges, we'd mastered enrichment. So if the Iranians want to keep 20 centrifuges, they probably want to do the same thing.
All right, thank you. Bye. Great. No, he says Minister Secretary Straw may be interested. And
In the end, Straw phoned Foreign Minister Karazi.
I said, look, the deal's a deal. You guys are really difficult, kind of impossible to negotiate with. When you sign a deal, it is a deal.
Iran dropped the request to keep 20 centrifuges, finally implementing the full suspension the West had been asking for. IAEA cameras monitored it. But the relationship between Iran and the West was about to take a new turn. President Khatami's term in office was up.
من به اونا گفتم یک بدبینی شدیدی در ایران وجود داره و اون این که میگه آمریکا میخواد ما رو به کلی از این حق محروم کنه، اروپا هم دارد در مسیر آمریکا حرکت میکنه. و هر چی شما